Hi, I'm Dennis Dempsey. You are listening to the Faith in Humanity podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Faith in Humanity podcast. On this episode, I sat down and spoke to Julie McAllen and Dan Robbins. You may recognize Julie's voice from Christy Darlington's mini-so. She spoke a little bit towards the end, so you may recognize her voice. And if you haven't listened to Christy Darlington's mini-so and her episode 10, definitely go back and listen to both of those because they're fantastic and it will really help you to fully understand what's going on in this episode. Both Julie and Dan were Jehovah's Witnesses for many years. They not only donated their time, their energy, their money to the organization, but also they really surrounded themselves with their friendships and their family. They really made sure that they kept that all within the organization to stay true to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And it seemed that something, I'm not going to go into detail now, but they'll talk about it, but something turned and they left and they discussed the difficulty of leaving and then they discussed their faith now and how they became Christians and everything. It's really fantastic and I'm really looking forward to you all hearing this episode. But before we jump in to the episode, I just want to remind you to follow us on Facebook, like our page. You can find us there at the Faith in Humanity podcast. You can also find us on YouTube at the Faith in Humanity podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at TFIH_podcast. And you can also email us at tfih.podcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys. And lastly, if you guys just have a second of your time to go on and just give us a rating, preferably a good rating, that'd be fantastic. It would really help us a lot. Just please take a minute of your time to go and do that. All right, hope you enjoyed the discussion. Julie, you ended up joining the Jehovah's Witnesses because you had this real sincere and authentic desire to have a relationship with God and understand His Word, the Bible, fully. And as I was reading your testimony, it's I had trouble understanding why God would put you through 7 years down this dangerous path following, as you say, a false prophet. It seems that he just delayed his walk with you, even though now you are a devout follower, so you're a devout follower of Jesus, so you did come back. But it seems that you were searching, you were hungry, you were sincerely asking him to open up your eyes, and it seems that he took you down this bizarre detour, and then at the end of it, you still praise his name, and I feel, and maybe this is just human nature, but I feel that people would almost say that you're justified in being angry at him for kind of going through this really difficult time. And how do you, so why do you think that he took you down this path? And how do you find the ability to praise this God that kind of took you down this really troublesome point in your life, made you go through this troublesome period of your life?
I think that's a great question, and I think that also addresses, when you said, you bet I could be justified in being angry. Believe me, I was, and that, we have journeys with God, and I recognize that in some people when it comes down to prayer, that sometimes you pray for something, and when you don't get the answer you want, they oftentimes become angry with God. But I see now on this side of it, having gone through a lot of it, is God trusts us. He trusted me with this. When I prayed to him asking, if this is a cult, make it obvious so I don't have to go through it, because of course you hear that when you're studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. People tell you, oh, it's a cult, don't do it. And praying that, here I had read in the Bible that Satan was an angel of light, and I thought, what do I know of Satan and Jesus? I'm just starting to study the Bible, and I was aware that I could easily be misled. So I prayed to God, please make it obvious. And yet, yes, he allows me to go through it. because education of what you learn yourself, is much more valuable. And you can probably relate to this as a kid. Your parents tell you, don't touch that, don't do that. Sometimes by the fact that you did touch it, now you don't want to touch it, I know now what deception, how it works, what it looks like. I know what it is to be 100% dedicated to something that is false. I don't think I would have appreciated that had I just been told that, that's a cult, stay away. So now when things come down the pike, I recognize it, and I can visit a church and I'll recognize legalism pretty quick because I learned it, So that's what I value is, even though I did go through the depression, I did go through the anger, coming out on the other side, I just I wouldn't change a thing. I'm just thank you, Lord. Thank you for trusting me with that trial, because now I know I have my answer to that prayer.
And you're also able to witness to other people. You're also able to help other people in some of those situations. You can say
that. Yeah. He writes their stories. It's like our testimony. It happened even just this morning. A gal had contacted me through the ministry, and she'd said that she watched a video testimony that I gave, and she related to it so much. She said she broke down in tears, and she was thanking me. I said, yeah, well, thanks, but it's that's God's testimony through me. He wanted to touch you and love you through my story, and that's okay. So yeah, for that reason alone, I say, thank you, God. Thank you for allowing me to go through what I went through. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I'll read a scripture to you, Psalm 66, when the Israelites had to, go through, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Moses and, the parting of the Red Sea and everything that they went through in their slavery, and they come out, and I'm turning the page there, Psalm 66, gotta have this ready, 10 through 20, I love the way it's put here. For you have tried us, O God. You have refined us as silver is refined. You brought us into the net. You laid an oppressive burden upon our loins. You made men ride over our heads, and we went through fire and through water. Yet you brought us out into a place of abundance. So a lot of times, we go through trials and we don't understand at the time. We go through our anger, we go through our depression, whatever. But we know when God has delivered us, and it's more abundant. It's better than it was when we first went in. He's bringing us to a place of abundance, and that's exactly what Jesus promised. He promised life, and life abundant. And what happened to me is, I followed that angel of light. And the devil couldn't kill and destroy the gospel, but he could distort it. He comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And so one of the things he did with me was he distorted it. I could still have this Bible. I could still, speak these words. I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. It was a very pseudo-Christian thing. I thought I had come into Christianity, but I didn't realize how much things were being distorted and tweaked and added to and subtracted. Now I can understand that and what you just said, so that I can minister to others, because I understand it more fully, and they're in that place of confusion, and I get it. I know right where they're at. So you mentioned that you did pray. This was while you were getting involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses. You prayed, I think specifically, you wrote on your testimony, God, if this is a cult designed to take me away from you, please make it obvious. And then you went through the 7 years. So do you find that now, I'm guessing you're more in tune to how God answers your prayers, because he did ultimately answer your prayer. And also, because prayer to me has always been incredibly challenging. It's a fascinating and almost mysterious component of anybody's spiritual walk. And what would you say to someone who says prayer doesn't matter, I've been praying for this thing and I haven't been getting an answer? Would you have any advice? Absolutely. I think that sometimes what we learn most from prayer is that it's not always about getting the answer, as you said. It's building that relationship with God. And so oftentimes you hear that prayer changes us. It may not change the situation, but it does change us. I've definitely experienced that. Sometimes I'm just learning to refocus, because what's happening is, Jesus said, pray this way, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And he talked about pray your kingdom come, pray God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So his focus was always God's will. Now, when we come into prayer, we've got our little list. We want what we want, and that's okay. It gets us there. But what's really supposed to happen is to come into that alignment with God's will. So at first, we may not be praying in his will. We may be saying, God, this is what I want, this is what I see, and blah, blah, blah. But as we remain in prayer, if we're really sensitive to his leading, he will begin to shift the focus for us, because it's really the prayer that is answered is the prayer that is aligned with his will. And so that, to me, obviously I didn't do that as a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't really pray as much as I do now. I've learned a lot just by praying, And so when you say, what would I say to that person? I would say, yes, keep praying, but keep open to hearing what his will in it is. And find the peace in that, because that's what Jesus is really teaching us about prayer. Pray his will be done. And I believe that his will is, it's stored up for us in heaven, and he wants the best for us, right? So it's stored up for us, and he wants it, on earth as it is in heaven, but we may not be praying in the right direction. So he can teach us that. And, his delay is real obvious in the Bible. A lot of the stories in the Bible show that it did take time. I think of, when Joseph had a dream that made his brothers very jealous, and it was about them bowing before him. Many years had passed, and Joseph, he was, rejected by his brothers. He was spent time in prison on a false rape charge. He went through a lot of things that, he should have, you feel like from an earthly perspective, he shouldn't have had to suffer all that. Mm-hmm. But yet, in the final outcome, the dream that God had given him was true. His brothers were in a position where, Joseph could have, really hurt them, because he was in a higher position now. But it was really for the saving of many lives. He was, in position to bless them now. And so I see that in my own life too. It's like, why'd she have to suffer all that? No, God was positioning me. Now I'm able to bless others. Now I'm able to minister to others. So there's a real reason for the delay. And remember, God's timing is not our timing. Yeah. We want things a little bit quicker, especially in our culture. We're used to, microwaves. Get it done now. But God is eternal, and He's actually in that also moving us to appreciate the eternal perspective too.
Yeah, I think there was a joke that I always heard that was like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans or something. And I think he does. He gets a kick out of us, I realize it happens when I come into prayer. I can't help but, tell him my plans, tell him what I want, fully realizing that, God, you may move me to start praying differently, and that's okay, Yeah. And Dan, you have a much different story from Julie. You grew up in the church, right? Or in the Kingdom Hall? Okay, so your parents were Jehovah's Witnesses?
Both of them, yeah. What's interesting about it, though, is my dad, he was kind of a rebel, I guess you could say. He was a drug addict, biker. But I believe in his heart he had a spiritual desire, and so whether he just did it to appease my mom or was genuine about it, that's debatable. But for the season as a child, very short season that they were together when I was small, that he was a Jehovah's Witness and she was a Jehovah's Witness. But they split when I was, probably kindergarten age. So I don't remember clearly a real time when they were together as Jehovah's Witnesses together. But my mom has always been, as far as I can remember, and is still to this day a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh, wow. Okay, and you talked about because of your father's rebellious ways, it was really hard to be accepted, or you weren't even accepted by the church, which you said that they were concerned that you would turn out like your father. Is that correct?
The Jehovah's Witnesses is somewhat of a good old boy club. So if you're in the good old boy club, you're accepted. If you're not, you're kind of on the fringes. So, elders' kids or ministerial servants' kids, and just it's easy to do that as a human. But so I wanted to be accepted. I mean, you want that acceptance, so you want to be accepted as a Jehovah's Witness. Well, because of the problems that my dad had created, and my mom, her brother is a ministerial servant, and in the good old boy club, well, you always have this, frown or judgment looking at you because you're not the same as their kids. So yeah, it was kind of a thing, and there's that. You feel it as a Jehovah's Witness. You get judged, and so I was never really accepted. Never one of the good old boys, I could say.
Yeah, but it's something that I was having trouble understanding. Is like, why are you being punished for your father's sins? That wasn't you. It's the mistake that your father made. So it seems like they already wrote you off as damaged before you even had time to yeah. Basically,
and so you kind of, when you hear that or experience that, you kind of become that. Quite honestly, yeah. I wanted a relationship with my dad, and so it's like you want to have a relationship with your dad, and I loved my mom too. So it's almost like I became the worst of both worlds. I became a religious drug addict, if you could say that.
Wow. Yeah, and you were never baptized. I'm sorry, what?
Never. I said later in life I became a religious drug addict, before Christ saved me.
And you were never baptized. You were an unbaptized publisher. I'm not entirely sure what that means, though. I know what unbaptized means. I don't know what publisher means.
It's funny. It sounds like a book salesman, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Publisher.
That's like the images that conjured up in my mind when I read it.
It's quite funny that's really what it is. You become unbaptized publisher through a season where you do good in front of the elders and the ministerial servants, and as you prove yourself to them, they see this example. You're able to go out and service and talk at the doors. So it's one of the kind of things that you do before you get baptized. You become an unbaptized publisher, where you're going out door to door in the field ministry is what they call it. And so that's one of the steps before baptism.
Mm-hmm.
But it really is book sales, honestly. From a perspective of, looking outside in, you're basically selling Watchtower. Obviously they're giving them away free at the doors, they're not charging, but you're propagating a belief through literature.
The issue that you had with feeling accepted, and I think that this is a major problem that I've been kind of hearing a lot about in the Jehovah's Witness organization. And Julie, you kind of identified this, how you saw unhappy people and thinking of Paul, or you were concerned about certain members hurting. And when you brought that up to some of the elders, they kind of brushed it off by essentially saying, they need to carry their own burdens, or, you have to look out for number one or take care of number one.
Yeah.
So it seems that there's this problem in the church where people that are struggling in a broken world, which we're in a deeply, deeply fallen world, and and we're all broken souls. We're human beings. No one's perfect. Even if you've saved from the time that you're 12 and you're 80-something years old, you're so flawed. You're still making mistakes and everything. So I don't understand why they demonize or shame these struggling people. I don't understand the logic behind it, or if there is even logic. I don't know if it's just for the image of the organization as a whole. I don't understand. Maybe you both can kind of talk about why they do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from my perspective, so, and this is, scripture that led me to salvation, and one that is very dear to my heart is a leper. You can't, the leper it's a disease back in the Old Testament, the leprosy. It's like you can't change your skin. You can't change it if you got leprosy, that you couldn't do anything about it. And so these lepers had to yell, unclean, unclean, unclean. They couldn't change their clothes. They couldn't trim their beards. They had to appear, and they had to let people know, hey, I'm diseased. And where Jesus had mercy on the leper, and he came to Jesus and he said, Lord, if you just wanted to, you could make me clean. And Jesus said, I want to, and he reached out and he touched him and he cleansed the leprosy. The Pharisees had no mercy. When they saw somebody abused, Jesus talked about loving your neighbor, they walked by. They had no mercy. And Jesus said, you're good at following all of these tithing and all that, but you've left out mercy and justice. Mm-hmm. And that's where the witnesses are, because they do everything externally. It's all external holiness. It's not internal. And so they leave out justice and mercy, and they only follow these laws of the Watchtower ritual laws, basically. So it's I don't know how I think that it's because of the fallenness. When we're not internally clean, we only have that externalness, and it's very ugly, to be honest. And that's what's in the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's external, everything external, but inside it's venomous and poison, and quite honestly led by Satan. So his objective is to destroy you. And so when he has you blinded, you're fulfilling his objectives. It's destruction. People, broken people who Jesus came for, the sick, and those that are in need of a physician.
I agree with Dennis that it's hard to understand. We can put forth, here's what's going on in the Watchtower. It's still hard to understand, because you'd think anything that's promoting itself as Christian would want to show mercy, would want to, be seen as loving. It's like, why does that not happen there? And so, well, in the nuts and bolts of that, my experience that human nature, sure, just, hey, I want to, I see somebody down, I want to lift them up. And so I was trying to encourage that sister. But really what it came down to was, because when you're a Jehovah's Witness, it's a lot like, signing up for a job. You punch in and punch out. You record how much time you spend out there in the field service. So they keep a card on you. You turn in a monthly time card, and this is, how many hours I spent knocking on doors. This is how many books I placed, how many, Watchtower-led Bible studies I conducted. And so they get used to seeing how much that publisher, that's what you're called, does in a month. And so, there was a card on me. There was a certain time expectation. Oh, this is what, Sister McGowan usually does. And my hours began to go down, because when you're just visiting with another member of the congregation, you're not counting your hours, right? And I figured, well, that's okay. I need to spend more time here with my sister and encourage her and stuff. So I was questioned about my hours. So, see, that's their concern. That's that external that Dan was talking about. It doesn't matter where someone's at emotionally or what's going on. It's like, your hours have gone down. We expect you to go door to door. We expect you to place this many publications. That was the problem. So that's where that mercy is just gone, because they're just checking on hours. And that really is their concern. They're number crunchers because it's a business. It's not really, even though the average Jehovah's Witness would say it's, it's a face, it's all that. I certainly felt that way when I was a Jehovah's Witness. This is my, faith and everything. But when I look at it now, it's like, wow, what a business racket.
Julie, you were kicked out for questioning or belittling the need for the organization's role in your faith journey. Essentially, speaking truth to power, I guess one can say. You said in your testimony that if people have faith in Jesus alone, they, the cult organizations, may lose control of their followers. Why do you feel that the Watchtower, or any cult organization for that matter, need to keep control over their members? For example, I've talked to many ex-Scientologists, and Scientology has been described to me by them as a cult masquerading as a religion run like a business. So they would answer that question by saying Scientology wants your money. like they want to keep control of you to keep you in for what's in your wallet or your pocketbook, So if that kind of helps you answer that question. What's like the underlying reason to keep this need for control? Because I feel like debate and having discussion is a great way to, first of all, learn about other people, increase your knowledge, and also just sharpen your own beliefs and everything. When you talk it out with someone, you understand it better and you learn more, and you're able to describe it and talk about it better.
Yeah. You mentioned Scientology, and I remember, reading about some of the people who have come out of there, and I just thought, my goodness, I wouldn't even be able to afford to be a Scientologist. No, yeah, I think you can be, pretty poor financially and be a Jehovah's Witness, but what they really want is your time. And time is money, because if you're Jehovah's Witness, you are their free labor force. You're out there committing your time, going door to door, and maybe, like Dan said, it's not like you're bringing in tons of money from that literature, but then there are those that each publisher, you're paying for the literature that you bring to your neighbors. So that literature.
Wait, you pay up front for the literature? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, so you pay for it and then you have to sell it back.
Right. So at the Kingdom Hall, there's contribution boxes. There's not a basket that gets passed. There's contribution boxes, and one of those boxes is for the literature. And so you go to the literature counter, and I think this may be changed now. This is back when I was a witness, because I know they have online giving now and stuff. But when I was a witness, the contribution box was there, and so I'd go to the literature counter, and I'd get, so many Watchtowers Awake magazines, the book that they wanted to highlight that month, and I'd know that I'm going out in service, I'll be out there for X amount of hours, I'll probably need this amount of literature. So then I would put in the contribution box to pay for that literature, and then you're going out to your neighbors and offering this literature, and they can offer a donation if they want, or you just give it to them for free. But if they do offer a donation, that goes back to the literature contribution box as well. So, and of course, every time you're going out, you're increasing the chances of, more Jehovah's Witnesses coming in. So you've got a bigger labor force too. So, and plus, it's not just that individual, they had my time, but then not only was I out talking to my neighbors, I was also raising my kids in it. So, they would want, families in. They definitely put that pressure on you. You feel horrible if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you don't have the rest of your family in. You're gonna do something to work on that. There's a pressure, as a parent, I had to put pressure on my kids, pressure on my husband, So they know when they get one, they're gonna get some more too.
And your family, right? Everybody in your family's out of the organization, correct?
I was the first to join, and I began to raise my children in it. I was out before they hit middle school, so they were never baptized.
Okay.
They're doing okay. I do have a brother-in-law who got baptized a year after me. He's married to my sister, and he is still an active witness. He shuns me. He raised his two boys in it. Neither one of them are baptized, and they're 22 and 19 now. The one seems pretty, just average 19-year-old, He doesn't seem to have any interest in going back there. The other one I'm a little concerned about. He just seems to keep to himself a lot. I think that there's been some damage done there, and I don't really have much opportunity to talk to him. As when you're growing up as a witness kid, you kind of, you don't make friends at school. You don't do the normal things. You don't participate in the birthdays and holidays. You don't get involved in sports, extracurricular activities, because your time is so scheduled. You got to be available to go to the meetings. And you don't just go to the meetings, you prepare for the meetings. You're always studying ahead of time. Do you have your Watchtower study? Do you have, your book that we're going to go through in the book study? You have to be prepared for those meetings, prepared to participate at those meetings, raise your hand and give an answer. And then you're always out in service, out in the field service. So parents tend to guard their children's time, and they also tell their children not to make friends with worldly kids, which means anybody outside of the organization. So that kid is missing out on normal socialization, of making choices, on friendships and such. And that kid is also being conditioned that the world's about to end. Why bother planning for college? Why bother planning for, anything other than going out in service? Because, this world is going to end. And so the best use you can make of your time is to tell your neighbors the good news of Jehovah's Kingdom. It's ridiculous. And it's really sad, because there's lives that have been very, ruined, really. There's a lot of survivors out there, I have to mention that. But the struggles that some people, and then when they come out, if they're a third, fourth generation witness, it's a huge deal for them to come out, because they know they're not just leaving a religion. They have lost their entire heritage. They have no more relatives that will speak to them. They've never really learned to make friends outside the Kingdom Hall. So there's some sad stories on that end. But there's a lot of support out there now. There's a lot of ex-witnesses offering support to other ex-witnesses. And in a sense, we become family then. We're like the substitute family for each other.
And quickly, just to go back, if your children were baptized and you decided to leave, would the church obviously they wouldn't have any legal right to keep them, but would they make the argument no, they have to stay, keep coming to the Kingdom Hall, or kind of make an attempt to guilt you into allowing them to keep coming? Would they make a fight for it? How does that work?
Well, even if my children were baptized, I would, according to their rule, my children were not supposed to be allowed to talk to me, really. Now, in the case of minor children, how does that happen? Because, they're in your house and everything. And, and it's true. You do hear about, families that they're talking to their kids when they're not supposed to be, and stuff like that. I would think, although, here's one thing. My kids weren't baptized, but when I left, one of the first questions I asked the elder as I was leaving was if my kids could still play with his kids, and right away he just said, oh, absolutely not. My kids suddenly were, demonized, he didn't want his...
They're unclean.
Yeah, unclean. And, kind of what that was... So I thought, though, that, okay, here I am, this disfellowship mother. I honestly still believed at that time that, I've got these brothers and sisters at the hall that think, my kids are going to perish because of me being this bad mother. I thought I might get a few phone calls saying, can we pick up your kids for meeting? Can we pick up your kids, to take them out in service? I thought that maybe they would step up that way. It's I never got a call. They really did just, because I thought they might take it upon themselves to want to keep training my children up in the ways of Jehovah, but no, that didn't happen at all. So, so I still had a little bit of that trust in the Watchtower that I believed that, hey, we're all brothers and sisters, and if one falls, the other one picks up, and, all that, and that the Bible said that, if we lose mother, father, we gain mother and fathers. And I thought that they might have that attitude, that they would step in as mother, to my children and raise them according to the Watchtower. And so I was kind of preparing myself to say, no, you can't pick up my children, but I thought they would do it. So, yeah.
Well, good thing that they didn't then. Dan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's just ingrained in the theology, so it wouldn't even be something that they would have to pressure. Although they would bring pressure, it's just ingrained in the theology. If you disagree with the Jehovah's Witnesses theology, you become an apostate, and that's worse than anything. Like I remember when I was, trying to become an unbaptized publisher, and there was an announcement made, because they'll announce it, this person has chosen to not be one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Wow.
And I was just in shock. Like, how would you ever want to not be a Jehovah's Witness? So week in and week out, you're ingrained that if you leave the organization, you're under Satan's control. So it's a fearful thing to challenge or to think outside of what you're taught. So if a parent decided to leave, just like in my situation, I left, my parents are still in, well, they don't want anything to do with me. So we talk occasionally, but that's it, because they believe I'm under Satan's control, and they have to, like Julie said, leave father and mother, and they believe they'll get a reward and other kids and stuff. So anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good that you have some communication with them, because I'm sure that a lot of people have completely lost communication with their loved ones.
Yeah.
So it's good that you have
It's very limited for sure, but and there's some growth that I have to go through, in the way that I present Christ. I was so excited when I became a believer, and I just tried to show them every which way I could, every angle that I possibly thought biblically, and to no avail yet. But Christ is I believe there's promises that my grandma had a promise from Christ years ago that they would come out. So I'm patiently waiting.
Just keep planting the seeds, watering them as you go.
It's that persistent prayer that you guys were talking about a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't see it, just keep on persisting, keep on asking, because God is faithful.
But what you just said, that explains, Dennis said keep planting the seeds, and right away I thought, but it's so hard to plant seeds in people that will not even, make eye contact with you. Jehovah's Witnesses are trained, but, if they see someone who left the organization, they won't, you bump into them in the store, they're not going to make eye contact with you, they will not listen to you, they will not say a greeting, so the organization knows that they're keeping their members very separated from anyone who can actually speak some reason to them, and that explains too that when you said you don't understand how they can be so cold, no mercy, all that stuff, that's it right there, because they've got to keep so strict to keep their members in, because they don't want anyone to begin reasoning with them or plant the seed, something that will make them sink and soften, because they want their allegiance. You have to give full allegiance to the Watchtower.
They're very fear-based. Very much fear. If you think differently or if you question, it's a fearful thing. So they rule the organization. It's a very fear-based organization.
I mean, fear is a very good way of controlling people or augmenting how people think. So it's a very powerful tool. Dan, when you got out, you were witnessed to by your brother and your sister-in-law, right?
My sister. So she was the first one to come out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and she began praying for me, and I don't know exactly how many years, but it was a number of years, and she would send me stuff occasionally in my email that I would just quickly delete. And but then later, my brother came out, and me and my brother were very close, so we had always been best buds, always together. And so when he started questioning it, I immediately, this is just how ingrained it gets in your mind. I said, my brother's an apostate. I told my wife, I said, my brother's an apostate. I can't talk to him anymore. And meanwhile, this is how funny it is. Looking back, I was already shunned. I was already kicked out of the organization. I was called reproved by the organization because I was very good at sinning, and so I always got myself in trouble with one thing or another. But so I was reproved by the organization. I was shunned by everyone, and I was still saying I can't have anything to do with him. He's an apostate. I mean, it's just so silly. I mean, I can't even believe that I said those words, but I did. But then I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove you wrong because I know what I believe is right. I know it. And so I tried to prove him wrong, and I couldn't. And I at this moment, in those moments, because I struggled with alcohol and drugs my whole life, I was so heavily dependent on drugs and alcohol. I mean, I was a junkie. I had a needle in my arm at 18. I was shooting up with my dad. I was messed up. And cocaine at 16. I mean, I was a slave. So that's why I talk about that leper. I was a slave, and I just felt like everything I touched messed up. You feel that way. And so I just was, when I had come to this realization, I'm like, if this is not the truth, then gosh, there's got to be, then there's got to be a truth out there. And I went after it. I was like, Jesus, I got to find this. If that's not true, something has got to be true. And Jesus called my name, and I never looked back. I ran to him, and he cleansed me of my sin and that brokenness and that enslavement that I had my whole life of drugs and alcohol. And so I kind of look back, and I don't plan on ever looking back.
And how did he call your name? Like, just through scripture, or? You
know how he says, my sheep are my own, and I call them by name. So how Jesus personally called me by name. So there's a series of events, and I'll kind of just tell you how it happened in a nutshell. This is controversial, but one of the things that really broke the camel's back for me in believing the Jehovah's Witnesses wholeheartedly was demonic artwork that is like, there's in their literature, they put these faces and I mean, just it's demonic artwork.
Wow.
And you can, it's searchable in Google. Anyway, when I first saw that, I was like, this stuff is doctored. There is no way that this stuff is even true. And I had all my Jehovah's Witness material in the garage. And I went outside and I got it. And I was inviting all of my kids. And, I had brought them to the Kingdom Hall. And I tried to get my wife to go. And she was born a Catholic, so she never really went. But, and so I'm looking through these booklets and these pamphlets. And I mean, looking it over with a fine-tooth comb because I wanted to be sure. And sure enough, I started seeing these faces and these different things that they put into their literature. And I asked my kids, I'm like, I'm not crazy, am I? Like, I don't want to be crazy, and I don't want to, I'm not losing my mind. Am I? Do you see this? Do you see this? And they saw it, and I'm like, how can that be? Like, if this was true, if this was really of God, how could this be? But so that was one piece. But if I back up just a little bit, when I spent time in prison for methamphetamines, and I read through the Bible, and I always had this spiritual desire, always had it, and so I'm thankful to God for my parents bringing me into, giving me a God worldview. I had a worldview based around God. I believed in God, and I called him Jehovah and all that. But I would read the Bible. And I know that through reading the Bible, I read that story about that leper. Lord, if you just want to, you can make me clean. And I read that, and I used to just ponder, like, why can I not be clean? What is wrong with me? Why can't I be clean? I prayed, and I was so angry. And I was so angry, and I was back on alcohol and all this when this process began of my sister came out of Jehovah's Witness, began praying for me, and my brother came out. And that was right in the process of when I was back on drugs, I was back on alcohol, and I was so angry. I didn't want anything to do with God. And then these things started happening. My wife said, let's go to a non-denominational church. I said, I'll never step foot in the church. They're all of the devil. But at that time is when my brother came out, and so I started looking, and I'm like, okay. So then 4 months, and this, even amongst Christians, it's sometimes controversial. 4 months after that, after, the walls began to come down, about believing in the Jehovah's Witnesses, I had the most vivid dream. And in that dream, Jesus grabbed me by the hand and he said to me, he said, "Don't be afraid. The Father and I are one." Mm-hmm. And as a Jehovah's Witness, you don't believe that. You can't believe that. You believe that Jesus is an angel, as Christy shared earlier. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that I was struggling with. How can this be? But Jesus told me it. And so when Jesus grabbed me by the hand and he told me, the Father and I are one, and to not be afraid, he destroyed every lie that I had believed in regards to him. And I knew in that moment that Jesus was God. So that's how Jesus called my name personally. He personally came to me in a dream. He doesn't do that to everyone. Why me? I have no idea. I still thank him every day when it's on my heart that he did it for me. And I just am so thankful that he did that for me. And I don't know why, but he does, and I'm thankful that he decided to reveal himself to me in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that when you leave, it's not a very easy thing to do. Is there a lot of hoops that you have to jump through? You can't just say, "Listen, this isn't for me. I'm gonna go." I know that you're shunned, of course. Like, I understand that policy, but what's the logistics of actually leaving? Because I feel like in an average Christian church, if you decided to leave, first of all, they would try to help you. They would want to know what's the problem and everything. They would try to talk to you, and maybe if you're struggling with something, they would come alongside you and try to help you. But for the most part, if you want to change churches or if you just want to leave a church, you're pretty free to do so with really no strings attached. What is it like? Do you have to go through some procedure or anything when leaving?
I personally didn't really do anything just because I was never a baptized witness.
Yeah.
But I know people have sent in letters to the congregation that have been baptized renouncing it and telling from a biblical standpoint why they chose to leave. But I never went through that process. I just left.
But yet emotionally, wasn't it hard? Even though you didn't go through a certain process of writing a letter or disfellowshipping or anything like that, but was it hard for you, Dan, to leave? Were you in emotional turmoil, thinking maybe you were doing the wrong thing, or did you go through any of that?
Yeah, I think for sure you go through those. Absolutely, I'd say, because it takes a while for God to renew your mind through the Word, and there's those feelings. But one thing, like they sent because I was telling my mom, some things that I was learning about Jesus, and so she contacted the congregation, and they sent an elder and his wife over, who I had a Bible study with, so there was some familiarity there. And I started asking them these questions, and in about an hour and a half of me asking these questions and refuting their answers, and I was saying, no, they just kind of said, well, basically, okay, well, you're just going to be destroyed. Or, one of those kind of nonchalant comments, well, I can't convert. I can see that I'm not going to turn you back to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and therefore my hands are done. And I was like, wow, okay, I guess that's the love of this congregation. Anyway, so for me, I was like, good riddance. I was done at that moment. I was like, I'm done. No, it was a pretty clean break at that point.
Good. A lot of people, there's no there's no easy way of leaving. A lot of people begin with fading, we call it. They just start missing meetings. They start, just being sporadic in their activity as a Jehovah's Witness, and that in itself, alerts the elders, alerts everyone else what's going on. That's why, I always question my field service hours going down. They get used to a certain amount of activity, and when you slip from that activity, that alerts the elders. So fading in itself, and like you said, Dennis, that's fine. If you belong to a certain church and you're just, you haven't been there for a while, maybe you're on vacation, it's not a big deal, but it's a big deal when you're a Jehovah's Witness. So there have been witnesses that have relocated, just left town so that they are in a new town where nobody knows them, so they're not going to, be questioned how come you weren't at the meeting, you know? But eventually, a lot of those people that say they feel that need to make a break, to write a letter. I am no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I feel that's important. I was thankful I started to fade, and I think I would have eventually wrote a letter. I don't know. But what happened was they called me in for a judicial hearing. So they kind of made it easy for me. They disfellowshipped me. And I really wasn't ready for it yet, but I'm thankful for that hearing, but because it was during their questioning, I just thought, wow, this is really ridiculous. And I began to see they really think they're God. They really think they're in control of my life. You know, and I had rose-colored glasses on. I mean, because I really enjoyed being a Jehovah's Witness for the first few years, and really was excited that I had found the truth and stuff. So those glasses were obviously dimming over time, but they were kind of still on during that hearing, and I needed that confrontation to see just how controlling they are. They really put themselves in the seat of God.
And obviously you both have very negative views of the organization, but how do you view the people that are still involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and more importantly, the elders? Because in my mind, when I think of a cult organization, I think of the people that are like lower on the totem pole, and I see them as victims, kind of being manipulated emotionally, mentally, and going through various amounts of abuse. But then I think about the elders, and I find myself having sympathy for the elders, the people in charge. I feel like they're the ones that are putting the oppression and exploitation on the people below them. So how do you view the people that are still stuck in the organization and more importantly, the elders that are running?
I view them all as victims in bondage, and it's a mix as far as the elders, because I've certainly talked with former elders, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who were in that position, and, they were going through a lot of the same stuff we as publishers, the lowly publishers, were going through. I still believe that even the elder that, gifts to my kids, when I said, can my kids still play with your kids, and how cold he said no, I still view him as like a very sincere man, and have a lot of respect even for their family, and I see the good qualities, and I see him as just another victim. Here he's in that position, but he believes just like I did. He thought he was doing the right thing in, dissing my kids and disfellowshipping me. And I still pray for that family. Yet there's another elder there who I think, I think he knows what's going on. Obviously at the top, there's ones who they know they're manipulating. They know what they're doing. But I think for the majority, and even those in leadership like elders, are victims. They're in bondage. They've been taught this, and they think it's right. And so even when they're shunning, they think they're doing the right thing. They think that's an act of love, that somehow through that shunning you're going to, run back to the organization because the organization is good and the organization is God's channel. So they think they're participating in something good when they're shunning you and all that. So that's bondage right there.
Yeah, I agree. I think most people do it sincerely, and just like Jesus or Paul said, that they have a form of godliness, but it's like they want it, but they don't have any clue that they're deceived. Just a small majority of people, probably the governing body or a few people within the organization, actually know that they're propagating a lie, but ultimately it's a doctrine of demons. So,
and
so a lot of sympathy.
Yeah, and deception is different than a lie. A lie, I was deceived. I thought I was doing the right thing. I couldn't repent of that until I, understood, and then it becomes a lie. Then it becomes, wow, I was under a lie and I was promoting a lie. But when you're in that, you're just deceived because you think it's truth and you call it the truth,
Exactly.
And so, like, when you get in Revelation of, who is outside the gates of the kingdom, one of the things it said is those who love and practice the lie. So once you become aware this is wrong, this is a lie, this is not truth, and yet you love it and you practice it, you have some ulterior motive for doing so, whatever it is. You're making money at it, you like the power of it, you just can't break from these other relationships, whatever, and you're operating under fully aware that this is a lie, but I'm benefiting from it somehow, so I'll continue in it. Then you just do not have access to God's kingdom at that point. And because I was a person that was sincerely seeking God, I want my relationship with God, He unveiled my eyes to see, do you see the deception? It's a lie. So what did I have to do? I repented of it once I understood it. So that's where I pray for Jehovah's Witnesses. I understand. It's like, okay, they're oftentimes very arrogant. You get really frustrated with, they believe they have the truth, and yet, you have this empathy for them because, like, they're deceived. They just don't know it. And you just want to somehow, get those eyes unveiled, that kind of goes back to the Apostle Paul. Here he was, a Pharisee who was persecuting the early church. He was their enemy. But then God unveiled his eyes, the scales fell off his eyes, and he makes this statement in Galatians. He says that God had, I'm going to read it, but when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me. I'm like, wow, God had a plan for the man who became Paul way back in his mother's womb. But he delayed, just like, back to that question about me, he delayed that time. He even allowed him to persecute the church. And then he called him. And look at all the work that the Apostle Paul did. I mean, most of the New Testament was written by him. So, we are believers today based much on his writing. So God used him powerfully, but allowed that period of time to go by. And I think about that when I meet someone who my flesh wants to say, oh, they'll never become Christian, they'll never be a believer, they're just unpenetrable. I remember it's like, God may have a call on their life, and he's got an appointed time when he's going to unveil those eyes. So why not speak into their lives? Why not share the gospel? If they don't respond, okay, it's not God's appointed time yet. That's okay. I'll keep praying and just planting seeds when you can. So
this question I've asked most of my guests. I just find it really interesting because this is I talk to people from all different kind of faith walks, and I just love hearing answers from people on this topic. But if there is just, maybe you could share just one or maybe even a few maybe teachings, verses, or practices from your own personal beliefs that you think the listener can adopt into their life today and see benefit from.
One thing that's been so impactful in my life, and, obviously I go through seasons, and we all go through seasons, but one consistent point that is so, and I think you touched on it earlier, is prayer. And I'm so thankful to, just as you were talking to Julie about her, going through the cult, I'm thankful that God allowed me to be raised in a cult, as crazy as that sounds, because I have found that people a lot of times are susceptible to what other men say or what other women say without checking the Bible, and I've actually experienced it in the Christian church, where people have these walls based upon things that they've heard from other people. And so I'm very because of that, I know how important it is for me personally to have an intimate prayer life with Jesus. And granted, in this season, we started a business, and so I haven't had a whole lot of time to invest in that. But when I was first saved and I saw this example of a person that would pray 2 hours a day, I used to think, how can you do that? Like, I don't even know how that's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems illogical to me. I'm coming from a Jehovah's Witness perspective coming out, and I'm like, the only time we prayed is at meals or before a Sunday service. But then I started with just a few minutes per day, and it just grew and it grew. And at one point, I was praying a couple hours per day, and now that's gone down a little bit through this season, or gone down quite a bit, actually, I should say, in this season. But prayer, a habit of prayer, is so important, because you do, just as Jesus would separate from the crowds in different times, he'd spend all night in prayer. And then you read in Acts, they met together, they prayed, and their prayer is the probably most important thing of our walk with Christ, because you're communing with God, and you hear from him through his word in other ways, but you're communing with the Father, and he strengthens you. And I don't know how anybody could personally make it through this world without Jesus. I'll just be perfectly honest. I mean, I just don't understand it. I don't know how I made it without him before. I know his hand was guiding me even through my deception and hard times. But man, I just don't. I need it. I have to have prayer. So that's my little spiel.
Yeah, would you give any suggestions of like how, like you said that you got to a point where you were praying a couple hours a day. Would you give any suggestions, like maybe in the morning, or would you say like maybe, hey, I took chunks of the Bible and then I prayed over that? Would you give just some guidance, a little bit of guidance that maybe help people to help them jump off?
Don't start with 2 hours, that's for sure. Just start with a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Literally.
Don't run a marathon after on the couch all
years. Start with a few seconds even, if that's all that it. God, I love you. Please use my body as a living sacrifice today at my expense, something simple. And God, please help my prayer life grow. I mean, and I'm sure that this is consistent with all Christians, but this season was extremely tough for me. I mean, I didn't have a desire to read the Word. I didn't have a desire to pray. And I'm like, something is off, wrong. And so I'm asking God, please give me a desire to read your Word. Give me a desire to pray. And wouldn't you know, he answered those prayers. So I have this unquenchable desire to read the Word again, like a new believer, which is really amazing. But I mean, and it was something just that small. Here's a little story. This is a little bit off the topic, but it shows the power of prayer. So my friend recently, I was in the hospital, I got a message from a friend that said, so and so's in the hospital. I know you guys were friends years ago. Can you go and visit? Well, what had happened? She got a blood clot in her leg. Her foot began to lose the circulation, and she had to lose her leg. So went to visit her at the hospital. They believed that once they removed the leg that she would get better. Well, they found out that there was a clot in her heart. And it was so bad because she was not getting circulation in her leg, and her leg was dying, and every part they took off, it kept dying. And so they're like, if we can only remove so much. Well, then they found out her heart had clots and that it was enlarged. They couldn't work on her heart because it wouldn't have started back up, they said, because it was too enlarged and it was too overworked. So they couldn't remove the clot, and they couldn't remove her leg at the hip, because she would have died, because the process would have been too much for her body to handle. So here I am. I'm like, she is going to die. So the only thing I said on the way to the hospital, my wife and I prayed, Lord, give me an opportunity to share about your son. I'm not a persuasive person. Just give me the words that I can say that she would listen. It was that small, about 20-second prayer. I went to the hospital. Her father-in-law actually cleared the room out so that we could just share Jesus with her. And she, cried, prayed to ask God to save her, and a miracle happened. Like within a couple of days, that thing in her heart, that clot in her heart went from 99% down to 1% or 2%.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
In a couple days, she's out of the hospital now. Like I wasn't asking God to heal her. I wasn't asking any of that. I just said, Lord, let me share Jesus. And it mind-boggling, modern-day miracle, Jesus healed her. And I had no faith in that. I thought she was going to die. But because of that simple prayer, just a few-second prayer, I believe God had it in his heart to save her life, and he listened, and God granted favor. And So prayer doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be, very eloquent or anything. I mean, even
doesn't the Bible
Acts
say
4,
not to make it elegant and long?
Yeah, exactly. Simple prayer. Lord, stretch out your hand. Give us boldness to share about Jesus, and but the important thing is to do it at least a little bit. I mean, it does take some discipline though, but we're disciples. We follow Christ, so there is an aspect of discipline that it takes. But I would say start very simple. Just start with the 20-second prayer in the morning. God, teach me to pray. Something simple.
Oh, thank you.
And what did the doctor say, just out of curiosity, after having that clot go from 99% to 1%? What was their explanation?
I haven't heard from the doctors yet, although I'm pretty certain that they would explain it as the medication helped. But it's undeniable that it was a miracle. Everybody knew it was a miracle. I haven't heard the actual statement from the doctors, though.
Okay.
I think you could do your next show, actually, on prayer.
I would love to, yeah, but it's just so fascinating to me.
It is, yeah. So thank you, Dan, for sharing that. And I like what he said about it becoming a habit, and that's true. I mean, you ask Jesus, teach me to pray, and you fall into that habit, and prayer is not always easy. And I've found with myself, it helps me to have a list to get me going in the morning, and also to have a prayer partner. Once a week I have someone that I call and we pray together on the phone, and then also to be in community. If you have a church where you can pray with more people, and also worship. That is one thing. That's another difference that often is not identified about Jehovah's Witnesses. I did not know what worship was. As a Jehovah's Witness, I came out and I started going to a church, and you read the little bulletin. It says who the pastor is and stuff. And I see this thing says pastor of worship. There's the youth pastor and the speaking pastor. Like, what's a pastor of worship? Like, I didn't know what worship really was. I thought that we just sing some songs before the sermon. I didn't realize that in itself is a ministry, and God has just really taught me so much about that. I never really worshipped God as a witness. It was very educational. Now I find that worship leads me in prayer. It opens me up, and so that's a whole new thing. Well, one of the first things that came to my mind with that was, okay, I know that your show reaches out to different beliefs, and here Dan and I are speaking as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, now Christian, and so people may be wondering, like, well, what does a Christian have to offer? And my first thought is, like, I get really touchy about labels. That I have a fear that by just using the word Christian, what do people conjure up in their mind? What do they think I am? And because people do have different opinions about that. And so just filling out forms where, they ask maybe, like on Facebook, when you fill out, what's your name and all this stuff. I sat there and thought about how I could elaborate on my Christian. What kind of Christian are you? Do you believe in this? Do you believe that? And I ended up writing forgiven. That to me is the core of Christianity. God has forgiven us. And that's what I really try to speak to people, that there really comes down to two religions. Either you're trying to reconcile yourself to God through your works, whatever those may be, whatever your sacrifice may be, when God is trying to get our attention through Christ that He made the sacrifice, He did the work, He's forgiven, He's given it four times, that says it all to me. God acted first. And so I guess that's what I want to say as a Christian. I hope that people catch that or whatever. That's what it is, forgiveness. And what, in my coming to Christ and shedding off the Watchtower, you don't just leave the meetings, it stays in you. And I didn't realize I was walking around with this mentality of works, and that produced an anger in me. What do you want from me, God? Because I was a very moral Jehovah's Witness. I was doing things right. And so I expected God to somehow reward me. Why should I be disfellowshipped? I'm a good person. So I was walking around with that mentality, and it was the book of Galatians that really tore that down, because Paul had written to them, because here they did come to Christ through faith. God shed his grace on them, and yet they were being tricked by these Jewish believers that were telling them, well, that's nice, but you have to get circumcised. And that's like one small thing, and yet Paul went to the extent of calling that a different gospel. He got on fire to, just tell him you can't do that. And what it came down to, he said, you've been severed or separated from Christ, you who are seeking to be justified by law. You've fallen from grace. And that hit me hard. God just kind of spoke to my heart and said, that's what happened to you. That's what's going on with you. That's why you feel so separated from me, even though you're trying to be so good. And Christianity is about I got to receive God's grace. I just got to let him love me. I just got to let him do all the work, And why should that be hard? Of course, we all want free stuff. Sure, if you want to do that for me, yeah, you want to give that to me. Why is that so hard, But I had to go through that, again, that just working toward my salvation, working toward reconciliation, righteousness, and justification, all that stuff, and realize how impossible it is. And that's how witnesses feel. They always, they're on a treadmill. You never have any security. And so God just really caught me in my tracks there and said, I did it all for you. Why are you trying to do all this? Just receive it. And so when I received it, then, boy, all that grace, all that love, it just pours in. And so when I speak to people, and I'm very, hot on that book, Galatians, I like to study that with ex-witnesses and really anybody who's under that, religious spirit, what I call it. It's not that I'm trying, I think that sometimes people who aren't Christians think that what we're trying to do is get them in church and get them, you got to get cleaned up and you got to get moral and stuff. No, what I really want them to receive is God's forgiveness that's already been poured out for them. I just want them to know it, and there's just a love that happens there when you receive it, and you just start changing without even having to think about it, because his spirit indwells you, and you begin to bear that fruit of his spirit. And so it's not that hard then, So that's what I want to say is just yield to God, and he'll take you on a journey, believe me.
Yeah, I find that maybe one of the challenging things for people is that they can get the concept of forgiveness, but yet it's difficult for people to feel forgiven. At least I've felt that way, that it's like, to know, okay, I know that God loves me unconditionally. Like I understand. I grew up in a Christian family. I understand that, and I understand that He forgives abundantly. But it's one of those, how do I feel forgiven? And I think that's maybe that's just comes with accepting His gift of grace.
Trust. Do we trust it? I mean, because it's one thing to have something in our head. We got all the information there, but to really trust it with our hearts, do I really believe it? Do I really trust it? And that's where faith is such a, it's an odd thing to explain, isn't it? What exactly is faith? I mean, you believe it, you trust it, and that's a personal journey, really. Yeah, Stay safe and peace be with you.